All right. We'll go ahead and just wait a couple more minutes. The food just got here, so if anybody's watching this online, you're missing out on all this wonderful food. We got steak and lobster. Man, it's good stuff. You guys are missing out. Hey, shut up. Didn't ask you. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. It's 6 o'clock. Thanks for coming out today. We have a pretty good turnout today. Glad to see everybody. Welcome to the Salt Lake Azure Group. I'm your host, Troy Fillerup. And today we're going to talk a little bit about Azure Arc. But before we get into that, there's a couple things I like to do before I start talking about the main topic. So I usually like to do a little tech tip where I talk about something that is completely unrelated, but that I find to be pretty cool. And I totally forgot about it until like 10 minutes ago. So I had to scramble and think of something that I've been interested in that's not related to Azure. And so I was looking at the Snapdragon processors that they're coming out with. Have you guys been following that at all? So you know that for, 40 years, Microsoft has run on Intel or x86 processors, right, on the RISC platform. Snapdragon recently announced that they're coming out with a couple of new chips, the Snapdragon X Elite and the Snapdragon X Plus, that are supposedly going to be faster than Intel i7s and in a laptop give 20 plus hours of battery life. So I've been following that really close because I'm super interested if they can do that. The first laptop's supposed to come out on the 18th. It's a Surface. If they could do that, that would be huge, and I'll probably buy one because this laptop here, if I get an hour and a half out of this battery, I'm doing pretty good. So I want something that's got a little bit better battery life. But anyway, it runs on ARM, so it's going to be Windows on ARM, and supposedly it works out really well, and it'll run all of the native Windows apps that we run today. So I've been really following that closely. Hopefully it delivers what they're promising, because that'll be really cool. So anyway, so the next thing that go ahead. Yeah, so they've been comparing it against the M2, and it is faster than the M2. It's faster on some things than the M3 and even comparable to the M4 in some areas. And so the performance is supposedly better than the Intel chips and on par with the Apple chips, which is what could really drive it, right? The battery life compared to, and coupled with the performance is what they're really shooting for. And so hopefully it all works out. They've tried Windows on ARM before, with Windows RT. And even Windows Phone is probably running on ARM. It all failed. Hopefully this time it goes. They've got some, all the big laptop manufacturers are coming out with laptops on the platform. And so hopefully it works out well. Yeah, so they've got it's going to run through emulation for the ones that aren't natively compiled to ARM. The same way, so that's how Apple did it. When Apple went from Intel over to their M series, they had to run most of their stuff through an emulator that I believe was called Rosetta, I think. Anyway, and so Microsoft is claiming that their emulator from x86 to ARM is going to be as performant as Rosetta is on the Mac. So we'll see what happens. I'm interested to see, and what's another $2,000 or $3,000 for a laptop? It's nothing. It's just money, right? Okay. Any other questions or comments about that? No? So the next thing that I like to do, and this is a totally volunteer thing, is for the last few meetings, I've opened up the floor to anybody out there who wants to get up and do a lightning talk. Something that you've learned, something that you're interested in, something that you want to share with the group. If there's anybody out there that has something they want to talk about, now is your time to get up and stand in front of a crowd of your peers and show how smart you are. So, by raise of hands, who wants to do that? Nobody? Okay, that's fine and not unexpected. But just know that I try to do that every time. So if there is something that you come up with that you think might be interesting for other people to know, and you don't mind getting up in front of others and talking, then feel free to, this is a forum where you can do that.
I do have one that's kind of just an off comment. So,
okay.
ChatGPT's released their
4.0.
Yeah, they integrated it with the whole thing, so I'm not paying for it. But every day, or actually every block of hours, they will allocate you a certain number of queries you can do at top level for free, and then it knocks down. To me, it's been interesting that it is better, and then see in comparison, they shift that back down to the free model. It's not completely like night and day, but if you're looking for like code stuff, you'll see V3 is a lot less complex. It's worse at explanations. It actually tends to generate more.
Okay. The 3 does, or the 4 does?
3 does. So the 4 tends to just all around better.
Yeah.
And they'll warn you, say, hey, you're out of free ones until X period of time. You still have the free questions, but here you go.
Nice. Yeah, I forgot that they did that free. I pay for it, so I didn't notice that. But
I just thought it was interesting, especially on the explanations about why things are who they are.
Yeah.
The explanation's not as good.
Cool. Well, and now Apple is integrating ChatGPT in the iPhone, right? Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, he said that before you come into any Tesla facility, you're gonna have to put your iPhone in a Faraday cage. So we'll see how that goes. I don't know. All right. Anything else anybody wanted to bring up? No? All right. Well, then let's dive in to what we all came here for tonight, is Azure Arc. And the background here is the Arc reactor, totally different thing. But that's the only thing that I thought was cool that was Arc. So that's the Arc reactor from Iron Man. Azure Arc is a little bit different than that. Azure Arc is a way to manage resources in Azure that don't live in Azure, right? So let's go to the next slide and we'll take a look. So a service in Microsoft Azure which provides centralized management of all the resources that exist in on-prem or multi-cloud environments. So what that means is that, you know, a lot of companies would like to be 100% in the cloud, but it's just not realistic, right? So you have stuff in Azure, you have maybe stuff in AWS, stuff in GCP, you have a lot of stuff on-prem. And how do you manage all of that? It can easily get way out of hand, right? Because you're trying to manage all your on-prem stuff on-prem. You're trying to manage all your AWS stuff in there, and you have all these different places to go. And so Azure Arc is a way to try to corral all those resources into a common user interface. And you know, a big buzzword that people say now, a single pane of glass, right? Everybody always says it's a single pane of glass. Well, Azure Arc is a way to manage all of your resources, Azure and non-Azure, under a single pane of glass. So you can see we've got multi-cloud here, on-premise, and edge resources that we can manage using Azure Arc. So what can you manage? Now, when I say resources, there are only certain resources that you can manage with Arc. So we have servers, both Windows and Linux, physical servers and virtual machines. So if you have a physical server, if you have a virtual machine, you can onboard those into Azure Arc and manage them inside of Azure Arc. Kubernetes clusters is another one that you can do. So containerized workloads you can bring into Azure Arc. Azure Data Services. So you can actually install a SQL managed instance in your on-prem hardware. So in a Kubernetes cluster, you can install a SQL managed instance that then gets managed like a SQL managed instance would running inside of Azure. And you get charged the same way. And if you have the infrastructure, you can manage scaling and all of that stuff inside of Azure, even though it's running on-prem. Okay. SQL Server, let's say you have an on-prem SQL Server, SQL Server 2022. I don't know, what's the current one? I think 2022, yeah. you have an on-prem SQL Server. You can onboard that into Azure Arc, and then you can manage that server inside of Azure Arc, including backups. You can manage access. You can look at all of the tables. You can look at diagnostics and performance telemetry inside of Azure Arc, even though the server itself is sitting on-prem. So virtual machines, as far as VMsphere or VMware vSphere or Azure Stack HCI, if you do it in those two, you have a lot more control over scaling of those things. You can deploy VMs directly into those. So these servers and VMs up here, you don't have quite as much control over them as you would under here. You can actually deploy virtual machines inside of vSphere from Azure Arc if you want to do that. And then you can host it in other cloud platforms or on-prem. So if you have VMs running in AWS, then you can onboard those into Azure Arc and manage those in Azure Arc, along with GCP, along with anywhere where you can run a virtual machine, either Windows or Linux, you can onboard in Azure Arc. So this kind of shows you all of the different things that you can onboard into Azure Arc. So we have Arc here. And in Azure Arc, you actually get visibility into app services and Azure functions and stuff inside of your Azure subscription. But you also have, your servers and your SQL servers and your Kubernetes over here. You have, and so what this is talking about is you can manage the compliance of your servers. So you can set up Azure policy to manage your servers. You can run log analytics against all of your servers, which means that you can tie Microsoft Sentinel into there, so you can manage all of the security of your servers with Defender for Servers, Defender for Cloud, and Microsoft Sentinel. And all of that is done through Azure Arc, and you can even control some RBAC on those servers, who can access them, and all kinds of stuff. And we'll look at some of that as we go. So what are the advantages of using Azure Arc? Okay, first of all, like we talked about, it's a centralized place to manage all of those resources, right? So you're not going to a whole bunch of different areas. You can manage everything. So once you onboard a server into Azure Arc, it gets an identity inside of Azure. So you can add it to resource groups. You can tag it. You can, again, apply Azure policy to it. And so you can manage all of that from inside of Azure. So it helps you with compliance, right? So if you're using Azure policy and you have, let's say you have a requirement in your organization to run a specific antivirus on all of your Windows servers, right? You can create an Azure policy for that particular antivirus. And then you assign your Azure Arc servers to that policy, and if there's any servers that don't have that antivirus running, it'll show you in the Azure portal. And not only will it show you, but it'll run the remediation tasks as well. You can run remediation tasks from within Azure on your Azure-enabled or Arc-enabled servers. There's also a lot of extensions that you can install. So we have the Azure Monitor extension. We have some anti-malware extensions. We have an update management extension as well. So you can manage all of your updates for all of your other servers from inside of Azure. And it'll show you if it has updates that need to be run, and you can run them from inside the portal and keep your servers updated that way, including, so you could run automations to have it automatically update them and all that. It's way better than going into Windows Update on every server and doing it by hand, right? And then security. So has anybody in here used Microsoft Sentinel? A little bit, okay. Super powerful. It's a SIEM and SOAR. And don't ask me what those stand for because I can never remember. But it's a SIEM and SOAR service that allows you to, it gathers all of the data from the log analytics for these machines and does a lot of an analysis on that to find security problems. You can create reports, you can create workbooks and playbooks to do mitigation. So let's say you have a lot of failed logins from a particular location, right? Microsoft Sentinel can bubble that up and show that to you, and then you can run a remediation playbook against that so that that stops happening. And so Microsoft Sentinel is a super powerful way to make sure that all of your cloud landscape is being secure and that you're not under attack or under threat. And so you can onboard all of these Azure Arc resources into Microsoft Sentinel and get all of that capability on your Azure Arc enabled servers as well. And then Defender for cloud, Defender for servers. And I was looking through, man, there are so many Defenders out there. There's Defender for cloud, Defender for servers, Defender for Windows, Defender for, you know, it's like Microsoft likes to pick one word and then call everything that. It's kind of like Defender. You got Copilot, that's everything AI is Copilot this, Copilot that. But anyway, so all of those security things you can apply to your Azure Arc. Any questions so far? Comments? No? Okay. So other uses for Azure Arc. Like we mentioned before, you can run Azure Data Services on any Kubernetes environment, and then you can have them scale in and out and get charged for those services like you would for one being hosted in Azure itself. So rather than having to have a SQL Server license, right, you could do a pay-as-you-go with SQL Server sitting on your own hardware if you do it through Azure Arc. You can create custom locations on top of your Arc-enabled Kubernetes clusters so that you can deploy Azure services to those. Like you could do logic apps, you could do web services and all that inside of the Kubernetes cluster that you manage. You could do perform virtual machine lifecycle and management operations for vSphere and Azure Stack HCI. We're not going to look at that at all because I've never used vSphere or Azure Stack HCI because I've never had need to. And then it's a unified way to view all your servers. And you can, any server that you have onboarded into Azure Arc is also accessible through the Azure CLI or the Azure REST APIs or the PowerShell, Azure PowerShell. And so you can manage all of these servers from the command line just the same way you would with any Azure resource. Now, one thing that you can't do is you can't onboard. So let's say you create a VM in Azure. You can't, by default, onboard that VM into Azure Arc, which kind of makes sense, right? Because it's already in Azure. You don't need to onboard it into Azure Arc. If you want to play around with Azure Arc and you want to use a VM in Azure, there's several steps that you can go through. You have to uninstall a couple things, remove a thing or two, and then it becomes just a vanilla virtual machine that you can then onboard into Azure Arc. So if you get to the point where you want to play with this and you don't want to set up your own VMs, you can do that. It's just a couple of steps. But what I found is if you're going to do that, it's easier just to fire up Hyper-V on your machine, spin up a couple of VMs and play with it in there. And that's what we're actually going to do tonight, is show you some of that. All right. If I can find my mouse, we'll click. Okay. So now let's go do a demo. That's really all of the slides I have, and I hate to disappoint all you slide lovers out there. So we're going to just dive into the Azure portal, and we're going to take a look at a couple of things if we can. And hopefully everything works. You know how sometimes it goes when you're doing live stuff. So let's go take a look at the Azure portal. Well, actually, first of all, let me take a look at my Hyper-V instance. So I actually fired up Hyper-V and I created a couple of virtual machines. So if you look here, I've got 3 virtual machines here. These two, this Ubuntu 2204 and the Windows 11, I've already onboarded into Azure Arc. So those are already done. This other one I have not yet. Getting ahead of myself. This other one I haven't yet, so we're going to go through the process of how to onboard a server into Azure Arc. And you're probably thinking to yourself, well, I've got 100 servers on-prem. Do I have to go and do every single one individually? No, you don't. We'll show you how you can onboard servers at scale. We won't do that because I don't want to fire up 100 VMs on my laptop. I don't know if it'll handle that or not. I need to get a Snapdragon processor for that probably. But we'll show you how to do one at a time and some things that you can do there. So I've got these two VMs. Now, if you go look in the Azure portal here, I'm going to scoot over here so I can see better. We're going to go into our Azure Arc here. So this is just in the Azure portal. And if we go into machines, you can see that I've got these two machines already onboarded. And these machines are on my laptop running inside of Hyper-V. Okay, so I can go into this Linux machine right here. And here in a minute, something's going to happen, I hope. Okay, I promise this works. But look, okay, see right here, Copilot. Even Azure has a Copilot. Everybody's got a Copilot. Okay, well, let's do this. Let's go see if my Windows machine will pop up quicker. Okay, so we'll go into Azure Arc, go into machines. Now, we also have Kubernetes clusters here. I don't have any Kubernetes clusters in here. Again, this is a demo, and I didn't want to do a lot of work for it. So let's see if this one comes. Okay, so here's my Windows server. Now, the Windows server that I've created, the VM, is Windows 11. Windows 11 is a very watered down experience in Azure Arc. To really get all the functionality, you need to have a Windows server, right? Windows 11, you can onboard into Azure Arc, but for things like, let's see, okay, you can assign policies to it, but there's a couple things that you can't do, like inventory and change tracking. Some of those you can't do. You can, however, go in and look at updates. So let's check out updates. So you can see now that this server has an update that needs to be applied. It's the 2004-05 cumulative update preview for Windows 11. So we can come in here and we can do a one-time update that would apply that update and reboot the server for us. Okay. Same thing with our, now the Linux machine. Oh, that's funny. Let's go look at updates for the Linux machine. This one's a little bit more out of date. I think. I really need to get the Jeopardy music for times like this, you know. Yeah, well, just so you know, there are 611 updates that need to be applied to this Linux server. I saw that earlier and I thought, oh, that's fun. But you can go into Azure Update Manager here, and it shows you all kinds of information about things that need to be updated on that machine, the way that they need to be updated. You can run the updates from here. You can automate, so using Azure Automation, you can automate updates on your Azure Arc enabled servers, right? So you don't have to go to each one and manage it there. You can manage it all from within Azure Arc. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so here's the, okay, there's 280 pending Linux updates. You can see that. We have 280 total, and two have been completed, apparently. So, yeah. So it's a really good way to manage all that stuff. Then you can go look at the log analytics. So if we look in the, if we go down to VM Insights down here, you can go look at the performance telemetry of this server. So this is live performance metrics. We can go look at the CPU utilization. You see it's not being used a whole lot. Available memory, and this is all real time. So this is all being updated in real time. Since this is all coming through, you can set alerts on all of this data. You can set automation tasks on all this data. So let's say you want to monitor your servers to make sure that they're not being overloaded. You can set CPU thresholds on those servers that send out an email to somebody when those thresholds get reached, right? And I think if you have them in vSphere or Azure HCI, I think that you can have it do some scaling in there as well. I haven't played with that, so I'm just kind of making things up. But until you prove me otherwise, we'll just say that that's the truth. So you can also go in and look at logs. Let's see if we can find a log report that'll work. I don't know if there's any data for any of these or not. Okay, there's not. So you can see this is just log analytics here. Let's see what this looks like. Okay, well, I had one that gave some data. Since these aren't very active servers, I mean, they just kind of sit there doing nothing. They're not streaming a lot of telemetry up to the server to take a look at, but let's see. No, that wouldn't have anything. Usage, let's see. No, none of that. All right, well, I can't remember which one, but you can see there's a ton of different things that you can look at here for your servers. And again, they're going to be sending up the log analytics telemetry, and we'll show how to set that up. But if we go back to our Windows server and we go down here into Insights, if we go into Performance, there's errors retrieving the data. So we can't get some of this stuff for a Windows 11 machine. We can only get this for the Windows Server class machines, right? So if you're going to do Windows 11, there's some things you can do, but in reality, you're probably not going to be wanting to onboard Windows 11 client machines into Azure Arc anyway. It's really designed for servers. But I did install a SQL Server on this machine. So if we come back to Azure Arc and we go into our SQL Server instances, you can see that we have a SQL Server instance here installed on that machine. So if we go into that, there's a lot of stuff that you can look at here too. So we can go in and look at the databases. So these are all of the databases that are on that server. Again, this is a SQL Server 2022 running on-prem on a Windows 11 machine. And it'll show all the databases here. You can go into the different databases and get some information about those. You can do backups of the different tables. Again, the database server that I'm running is a developer license. So a lot of the stuff we can't do because it's a developer license. You have to have an enterprise license or a professional license to get a lot of this stuff. You can set up automations for that. You can set up access controls. You can set up RBAC control to those databases from within Azure Arc, which is kind of nice because there's extensions that you can install on the server that help you with doing stuff like that. So if we come back here, you see we've got backups of the entire database. We've also got availability groups. If there's availability groups, and this is more for, if you have that other license of SQL Server, you can set up availability groups. This will show you all of that in there. Performance dashboard. Yeah. It'll show you the availability groups that you have set up for your server. Yeah, and monitor them. Yeah. Yeah, so if you go into here, you can see it's just a view only. There's no ad or anything like that. So, yeah. But if you do the SQL Server managed instance, I think you can set up all the scaling and stuff like that in Azure Arc. I haven't tried that because I don't want to set up a Kubernetes cluster just to mess around with that yet. But these are just normal standard SQL servers running on on-prem hardware. Yeah, so anyway, you can do a lot of stuff. Again, we're a little bit limited because of the license level that I'm running this at. But you can see that how easy it is. Well, you can't see how easy it is to onboard yet. We'll show that here in a second. Well, that's a good question. We'll take a look at that because it might show that in the onboarding screen. We'll take a look at that. I'm not sure what the oldest version is. I assume that you could do a fairly old version of it, though. We'll take a look at that. That's a good question. So here we went into SQL Server instances. We could also go into that machine itself. And one of the things over here is the SQL Server configuration. So you can go into that. So you can get into the SQL Server side of it from the machine itself, or it's also its own thing. And you can see here that this machine, so this is our our Azure Arc machine, it's in this resource group, this RG flag resource group, right? So what that means is that you can, organize these. You can add tags to them. We've got these tags down here, and you can organize them just like you can any other Azure resource. So let's go see if we can onboard a Linux server and see how hard that's going to be. So I'm going to stop this one. Just turned it off without shutting down properly. I wonder if it's ever going to work again. We're going to start this guy. So this server is brand new. I did a quick create with an Ubuntu image. So this server literally is just fresh installed. So we'll see what happens. We're going to play with this and see if it's going to work. So we're going to connect to this server. And I am going to switch this. I should have done this already. Okay. So this is our Ubuntu server coming up still. And while that's coming up, let's go start the process over here in our Azure portal. So we're going to go into Azure Arc machines, and we're going to add one. So we're going to add a machine, or we can create a machine in a connected host. Again, this is that vSphere or HCI that we can create a new virtual machine in that environment. But we're just going to add a machine that already exists. So we're going to click on Add a Machine. And there's three things that you can do here. You can add a single server, add multiple servers, or add servers from update management. We're going to do the add a single server, but these two other ways are ways that you can add servers at scale, right? So that you can, so this one creates a service principal that you can use. Over here, it's going to require my Azure login. So if you ever use the Azure CLI, you have to do AZ login. So that's what that one uses. We have to AZ login and then run the script in a PowerShell window. This one will allow us to use a service principal so that we can run the script without having to log in. It's going to use a service principal that gets created in Azure. And then this is I haven't played with that one, but that's a way that you can push it out to servers at scale. So we're going to do this one. So it's really easy. All you do is click Generate Script. We need to give it a resource group. So I'm going to put it in the same resource group that we have the other ones in. A region, I like West US 2. Right here. Operating system is going to be Linux. This is super important because it won't work with the script is different.
Because this is on-prem, what uses?
That's where it's going to put so all Azure resources have to sit somewhere, right? So when you onboard this into Azure Arc, it creates an Azure resource to manage that server. So it has an Azure resource ID. It is an Azure resource that's communicating with that on-prem server. So that's the Azure resource where it's going to sit. Yeah. Okay. Good question. Thank you. That's right. Or wipe out your virtual machine. It deletes the Azure resource, not the actual on-prem server. Yeah. But your on-prem server is going to be running the extensions that's going to be trying to still communicate. So you need to go into that server and remove those extensions. So if you're going to do that, let's say you wanted offboard those from Arc, it would probably be better to go into Arc, uninstall the extensions in the portal, and then wipe out the Azure resource. Okay. So we're just going to do a public endpoint, and then we're going to download the script. So this is our script for our Linux machine. Okay. So all we need to do is we need to run this script on our Linux box. So let's go back and look at our Linux box. Okay. See, I told you this is a brand new server. It hasn't even been configured yet. So we're going to do English. I don't know. English Dvorak maybe. Nah, we'll just do that one. Okay, it knows my time zone. Oh, let's see. I'll log in automatically because I don't care about security. Security's stupid. That's right. Sack up and unsecure all your servers. Come on. All right, so we'll let this go. And okay, apparently this takes longer than I thought. That's okay. You know, the other day I was messing with this, and a lot of times I'll use NordVPN, and I'll connect to NordVPN, and I fired up these servers, and they would not connect to the internet, and I couldn't figure it out. I was going in and trying to update host files, and I was screwing around with DNS, and then I went and I turned off my VPN, and everything just fired right up and worked perfectly. You son of... So if you're using a VPN, it apparently doesn't work with Hyper-V.
Snapdragon versus M4, M3 processors, is there any reason, practical reason to be on Windows if you're not maintaining free .NET Core apps?
So Windows versus Linux?
No, versus Mac. But mind you, I'm stuck on Linux right now, so like it's...
In my opinion, I wouldn't touch Mac with a 20-foot pole, but that's just personal. I prefer Windows, right? So I mean, it's kind of a preference thing, right? If you like Mac and you're in the Apple ecosystem, Mac's a great way to go. If you're in the Windows ecosystem, the Snapdragon is huge because it brings performance and it brings battery life that we've never seen before in the Windows world, right? And really, that's where the Snapdragon is really going to shine, is the performance and the battery life. I mean, they're getting 20 hours of watching videos on a Snapdragon processor on battery. So that's what I'm excited about, is the battery life and the performance. Now, there is a problem, right? I mean, it's ARM, so it's not your x86 architecture. So they are running the things through emulation. But, and again, this is all just reading articles, apparently the performance doesn't suffer that much from going through emulation. And it will run pretty much every app out there that there already is for Windows, is what they're saying. So, but if you prefer Apple and you prefer the Mac OS, then that's a great way to go.
Not VS Code, like the actual Visual Studio, they end up like that because no one was really using it.
Yep. And I personally love Visual Studio. I love it to death. I use VS Code a lot too, but if I'm doing .NET development, it's always Visual Studio. Oh yeah, and .NET MAUI, and I mean, you can do that stuff in VS Code, but you have to install extensions and you have to dink around and stuff. Visual Studio just works. Now, if I'm building bicep files or YAML files, VS Code all day long. But Visual Studio, and so that is a compelling reason to stay on Windows. And honestly, I don't really even use SQL Management Studio that much anymore. I've moved to Azure Data Studio for 95% of my database work. Just because it's quicker. It's actually based on VS Code. It looks almost exactly like VS Code. And so, but it won't do everything that SSMS does. And so sometimes I have to revert back. But yeah, good question though. And Azure Data Studio is cross-platform, so you can run that on a Mac. So, okay. This is still taking, okay.
What are you running on your laptop?
I've got an RTX 4060 video card, which was dumb because I don't play games. So you're asking yourself, well, what kind of a moron would buy a video card like that? Well, I don't know. Yeah, this video card is brutal. Yeah, this video card is just brutal. I mean, it's great. If you want to run VR on this thing, it'll run VR all day. But, well, as long as it's plugged in, it'll run VR all day. So, but all I do is development, and honestly, I got too big a video card. But that's the problem, is the video card.
And look, there's no concept of video graphics, edit bicep files, and not do anything. Works in battery life.
Yeah, so I've disabled the GPU from all the apps, so the GPU doesn't run But it's still it's brutal. And so there's a little battery saver mode, and that probably gets me another 15 minutes. So I try not to unplug as much as I can. Mike?
Well, this is where I was going to rush a also question. I know you get to it later, but like, so let's say you're running stuff on-prem, and you mentioned setting up like the CPU monitoring, but there's really no way to scale on-prem like there is in Azure. So like, even if we have resources available, you could just go fire up these other boxes, deploy this stuff on
Right.
automatically.
Unless you're in vSphere or HCI, right? There you could, but you're absolutely right. So what it would do is you could set up alerts to say, hey, this VM is getting clobbered. You need to do something about it. So you could do things like that.
Not every region automatic scaling, but on-prem scaling.
Yeah.
I have an unrelated question.
Yeah.
Maybe we're caught up.
Okay, shoot.
Maybe I'll ask. It's unrelated. It's about
Okay.
job situation.
Okay. Yeah. We'll after this, because it looks like it did just finish. Maybe. Well, go ahead and ask your question. It might be a minute.
So right now, I got laid off. I'm looking around, and there is crazy good people.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to kind of get the feel of the group as to what I'm seeing, reality, and what are people doing?
Well, I think one of the problems is that all the big tech companies are laying people off, right? I mean, Tesla just laid off 10,000 people. At the beginning of the year, Microsoft, Facebook, Apple laid off like 300,000 people, all right at the beginning of the year. What's that? Yeah, and Xbox, they laid off a lot of people. So I think that's the problem, is the market is getting flooded. I don't know if Utah's as bad. I wish we had somebody here that could speak to that a little bit better. But yeah, I mean, I think the problem is that there's just so many people getting laid off from everywhere right now that it's tough out there.
Someone else is more articulately explain this, but like there used to be a law where your R&D costs, like whatever you pay engineers, you can write that off as like the same way as buying like server infrastructure. Now you can only write off like a third or 25% of your R&D costs as you like go forward, tax reasons. So that's like a reason like on VC money or things like that, you can't like depreciate, write off R&D and engineering costs, which I think
Really?
is part of one of those. I forgot what the legislation was. It was like you used to be able to write off 100% of salaries. Now it's like 25%. So that changed.
That could be, yeah.
So that's actually the best. Nobody can tell me the economy is fine. So why so many layoffs? Why is tax interest rates? No, seriously, like look at tech moving the bus, direct interest rates. Because tech, especially higher ed stuff, are cash workers. So if you're borrowing money at 7%, that's a lot worse than borrowing money at 1%. So you have to show ROI. So that's why they start chopping up to show real ROIs. It's like a lot of tech companies like, that was never really made any money. They generated all this revenue and they just rolled it right back in. So the cascading that loop. They still get by because they're so big. But if you're trying to do that now with much higher interest rate, realistically, I don't think you're going to see a turnaround in tech interest go back down, and the capital goes back in. Sucks for us, but yes, if you look at like odds, a little young for the .NET crash, or the .com crash, but I believe interest rates are going up then too. If you track the interest rates, that was the best metric I saw. It might not explain everything, but it almost 100% tracks.
And Section 174 was repealed. That's what I was talking about. So like all software developments, R&D, no exceptions. then now domestic R&D done in the U.S. is now amortized over 5 years, and overseas R&D is over 15 years. You can write it off back in a year.
Interesting.
So if I'm paying somebody $150K, I can minus $150K from my revenue. Now I have to cut that out over 25%, 25%, 25%. For foreign, it's over 15 years. That's a big tax implication.
Well, and I think that could be a part of it as well, is the offshore resources, right? We find a lot of clients who want cheaper developers, and the way to get cheaper developers is to bring them from nearshore or offshore. And so I think that's happening a lot as well. So, yeah. 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 All right. Well, did that answer your question? Yeah. Good. 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 Have you talked to any of the recruiters at STG yet?
Not at STG.
Probably
everybody but them.
Well, let's talk after, and I'll hook you up with a recruiter here at STG. Yeah, for sure. But on a sour note, apparently this VM doesn't want to come up. We just got a big blue screen. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at one of the ones that I've already set up and show how it would have worked. So assuming that this would have worked, what we would have done is gone into that VM like this. And now watch this one not come up. Okay. Bring up a terminal window and then run that script. So let me show you the script that I used. Let's see. So this is the script. I downloaded it, put it into here, created a shell script, and I ran this. And then it went through, did all of its stuff. And once it was done, it showed up in my Azure portal. So that's all I had to do is run that script. Now, once you run that script and it shows up in your Azure portal, then you can have control over that and start doing stuff with it. So one of the other things that Azure Arc allows you to do is to install extensions on your machine. So let's go take a look at some of the extensions. Oh, that is the one, okay. Some of the extensions that we can install. So we're going to come back here. Now you notice I only have 2 machines still because I didn't run that script, so it's not going to show up in here. But if we go into here, we can come down to extensions right here. And these are the different extensions that we can install on a machine. So we've got the Azure AD-based SSH login. So what that means is that you can connect to that machine through SSH using an Entra ID account, which is kind of a cool thing, right? And the thing that I don't quite get is in the documentation, the Microsoft Learn documentation, it calls this the Entra ID based SSH login, which is correct. In here, it still calls it the Azure AD, and I think somebody needs to go in and change this spelling. But anyway, you can install the Azure extension for SQL Server, which is what we installed on our Windows machine to get access to the SQL Server, right? So it's just an extension that you can install. Did you have a question? No, okay, sorry. Azure Monitor Agent. So this is the one that you're going to want to install to get all of the log analytics telemetry, right? So they have this log analytics agent down here. But if you read this, it talks about how they're deprecating. It's on a deprecation path. It's going to be turned off on August 31st, 2024. So what they recommend now is the Azure Monitor Agent. The Azure Monitor Agent contains the log analytics agent along with a couple of other things, and it makes it easier to scale. This is a better solution for that. So if you're going to use log analytics, which if you're onboarding servers into Azure Arc, that's probably the main thing you're going to want to do is the log analytics. So you're going to want to install this Azure Monitor Agent. There's one for Linux and one for Windows.
Log analytics, you pay for the data written, not a data written.
Yeah.
That's not the data over the wire.
That's right. So I think, yeah.
So like if you can shorten that window, it's a little bit more efficient. Override.
And that's a really good point because log analytics can get really expensive really quick if you're not careful. All right, if you're streaming log analytics from a bunch of different places and you're just keeping it forever, that log analytics can get expensive. I don't think you have to pay for ingress for that. Yeah, exactly. So we have our Network Watcher agent. So we've got several agents or extensions in here. And if we want to install one of these extensions, we just come in here and we can install the extension right from here. So we'll pick the Azure Monitor agent for Linux. We'll hit next. And then we read through this. We're not going to use a proxy. So just like every other thing in Azure, right, it has this little wizard that you go through. We'll click next. It verifies it. Then we'll hit create. And you can also do this with Bicep or ARM templates. You can also do this through the Azure CLI. And so you can onboard these things and install these extensions with Azure commands. So. And it's going to go, now it's actually installing that agent on the Linux machine. And so you can do that. So if we come back over here to our Azure machines, we're going to come back to our Azure Arc, go to machines. So eventually, and I think it takes up to 15 minutes for a machine to show disconnected. Because it has a heartbeat that goes up to Azure, and then after it misses that heartbeat so many times, it'll mark that as disconnected. And at that point too, you can fire off alerts, you can fire off workbooks, you can do all kinds of things when a machine is disconnected. So that shows you that maybe there's a problem with the internet connection for that machine, or maybe that machine crashed or whatever. So this allows you to tie all of that stuff into log analytics and Azure Monitor, and then fire off alerts just like you would for any of your other Azure resources. All right, so let's go down. I do want to show this here, application services. So here in Azure Arc, you can actually go and look at like all of your Azure functions that you have in your subscription, right? And I'm honestly, this is something I just started playing with the other day. I'm not 100% sure why you would want to do that, but you know, I'll play with that and see if I can figure it out, because you can go find all that stuff other places too, right? So you could, if you're running them in like an Azure Stack HCI, you can run app services and functions on your on-prem hardware if you want to do that. You still get billed as if they're running in Azure, but you can run them on-prem through those other things. Let's say you want to keep control of your stuff and run it all on-prem. There's a lot of people that don't want to run stuff in the cloud. Maybe you have a super sensitive web service that needs to be controlled on-prem. Maybe you have some data residency requirements, right? Where like Germany, for instance, although you could just run it in the German data center, right? But this allows you to keep control of everything. It's not running in the cloud, it's running on your hardware, but you can still get a lot of the benefits of the cloud by running it on your hardware. So it's like Azure Stack. Azure Stack is essentially Azure running on your local hardware. And several years ago, I thought, well, I'm going to play with Azure Stack. I'm going to install it and see what it's like. And then I looked at the minimum requirements for a machine to run Azure Stack, and I mean, it's ridiculous. It was like, I had to have like 12 CPU processors, 256 gigabytes of RAM, and 20 terabytes of hard drive space, and my extra laptop sitting in the closet, just couldn't hack it, so I had to give up on that one. But so anyway, yeah, so there's all of that. Container apps, I really like container apps. I use those a lot these days. So you can see all of that in here as well. All right, let's go back to this. So what's Azure Arc cost? Right, what's the cost of that? Well, a lot of it is free. So you can onboard VMs into Azure Arc, assign them to resource groups, tag those, and manage them that way. And all of that doesn't cost anything, right? So what we've done, a lot of what we've done here today, to onboard them in there, look at them, add them to resource groups, tag them, that's all free. You can find them through Azure Resource Graph. So Azure Resource Graph is a way that you can visualize your Azure landscape, right? Because Azure can tend to get kind of sprawling. You add one app service, and all of a sudden you've got an app service, you've got an app service plan, you maybe have the log analytics agent. I mean, you've got 10 resources just adding a single website. So it does tend to get big. So you can use Azure Resource Graph to search through those. You can set up RBAC security to those resources, and you can add extensions and do automation. All of that's for free. The other services are billed as per the pricing for that service. For instance, log analytics, like we talked about. You're going to pay for the data that you're storing in log analytics. And there's, if you're running an Azure or a SQL managed instance on-prem, you're going to be paying for that as if it were a SQL managed instance that you're running in Azure, right? And so as it scales out, you're going to be paying for that, and you're going to be paying those costs. So, but other than that, I mean, you can get a lot of stuff for free if all you want to do is manage and visualize your servers. This is a really good way to do it, and it won't cost you anything. So, so here are some resources for Azure Arc. The place to go to learn anything about Azure or anything about Microsoft is Microsoft Learn, right? And everything's in there. They have a whole learning path for Azure Arc if you want to go through that. It has a bunch of modules that you can go through, and it really dives deep into everything about Azure Arc. So, any questions? Yeah, Mike.
You said it in some sure it's this way, but so obviously running functions, you're going to look at, let's say you're running a container app or whatever, a different kind of application, and you happen to use Azure. Are you still paying as if you put it in cloud?
So for an Azure function?
Or no, for the function we already described it is. But let's say container app.
So a container app or a container? A containerized app. See, a container app is a resource in Azure, right? Container app runs inside of a container apps environment. That one, yeah, you probably pay at Azure. If you're just containerizing an app and running it in Docker or Kubernetes, then you wouldn't have to pay for that.
Okay.
Container apps was previewed, Postgres was previewed.
Yeah.
That means its integration with Arc is in preview.
That's right.
Container apps.
That's right. Yep, that's right. Yeah. I mean, container apps are definitely GA. Yeah. I love container. I do everything in container apps now. It's awesome. So, yeah. Anything else? Yeah. So, well, no, Amazon wouldn't use this for sure, right? So they all have their own. I mean, I would imagine that Microsoft probably doesn't really run that much in AWS. I would guess maybe they do a little bit, but I don't know. They have 10,000 employees, I guess. That's a good question. I don't know, because yeah, I mean, I've been to clients where there's hundreds of resources, and it gets hard to manage. So that's a good question. I don't know.
So like the cluster, right? Like you could take Kubernetes cluster on-prem, but it doesn't even need to know if it's in EKS and AWS or Google's.
That's right.
It could be in any cloud.
That's right. Yep. Same with VMs. I mean, if a VM is running in AWS, Azure Arc doesn't care. All it knows is that it's a Linux VM running somewhere, right?
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So it's not like there's a hook for
Nope.
AWS or that.
Because you're installing the agent on the machine itself, and the agent is communicating out to
And you're
Arc.
putting something on a pod in the cluster.
Exactly. Yep. You know, one thing interesting. Is there any more questions about Arc? Because there's one other thing did you guys hear about the Google Cloud fiasco a couple weeks ago? Actually, it's been a couple months now. So there is a huge pension management fund in Australia that manages $134 billion worth of pension funds. They are running everything in Google Cloud. Google accidentally deleted their subscription, their entire account, including all backups, gone. Everything was gone, unrecoverable from Google. It was an accidental account deletion. $135 billion pension management fund. Now, luckily, some cloud architect at that company decided a while ago to back up everything into another cloud platform. So they had backups of everything on another cloud platform. It took them 6 weeks to get everything back up and running again. Can you imagine? Their entire account irrevocably deleted. I think Google should let them go for free for the rest of their life. So the day after, they called the Google CEO, and Sundar Pichai got involved directly to try to get that resolved. Could you imagine? Anyway, I thought that was kind of funny. Because it wasn't me. That's why it was funny. All right. Well, that's all I got. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it. And one last thing. We're not going to have another one of these until September because I want to take the summer off and I don't want to do this anymore. At least for the next couple of months. I know. I wish. Well, not till October, but I am going to Mexico. All right. So thanks for coming.